So here's a close-up of right after the box top is opened. This is what's inside. Lots of styrofoam, various accessories, and the engine is buried under there. The power head is up here to the right. And a few seconds later, I've removed the styrofoam just to expose what's underneath. I'm not going to unpack this all now. I'm not ready for it yet, but I wanted to get inside, get out my information, see what we have here, make sure it's in good shape. Got the outboard, propeller, the white box is a tack. That was an option that I ordered. Got mounting hardware, steering arm, the obligatory and useless little toolkit. I believe that's a gas tank, and that other cardboard box is the controls. It's a side mount control and a fuel hose. Yeah, there's the fuel tank. There's the handle on it, a little plastic fuel tank. Mounting bracket. I can confirm my measurements that I used when I laid things out. Gotta say, this thing seems huge. So much larger than I was anticipating, I gotta admit. 30 horsepower outboard. Just seems freaking huge. When I grew up, outboards, 25, 30 horsepower outboards weren't much bigger than this Tohatsu over here, this 6. Anyway, this is what's inside the box, but I'm not going to be doing anything with this for a little while. But I wanted to get it here on hand to confirm measurements and to have everything so that I can start doing ancillary installations when I'm ready. But it's going to be a little while before I actually mount this on the boat. So I took a rubbing of the mounting holes on this side of the outboard just because it was here, so I can confirm those and see what I can use. From the measurements, thought I'd be all right with the reinforcement that's in place. So for now, that's all I'm going to do. Let's close this back up again. I'll get this on a little cart so I can move it around. And I'll address installing it a little bit later. So I thought I was going to need threaded in lifting eye off the flywheel on this engine in order to lift it. I ordered one, but I wanted to see if it was the right thing, and I've just disassembled this box so that I can get the motor cowl off. And there's a nice lifting eye built right into the engine here, so I don't need the thing that I got. So that's good to know. If you're buying one of these engines, know that it's got a lifting ring built in. Pulled the outboard out of its packing, raised it up on my crane. So I've got the engine, it's hooked on the crane. This is actually slack at the moment. I've got it resting on this frame here, and it's resting on that styrofoam on the lower unit. And my first step with this is going to be to figure out where the holes through the transom are going to be. For a little protection when mocking up this outboard, I put some tape over the transom inside and out, and it'll also give me a good way to make marks so that I can pre-drill and prep those with epoxy before we do the final installation. The anti-ventilation plate on the outboard, which is this thing, a lot of people call it the cavitation plate. It's supposed to end up 0 to 1 inch below the bottom of the boat. So to help with that, I just glued this. I used a couple little dabs of hot glue and glued this 3/4 inch thick pine to the bottom of the boat in the center to give me a visual reference. As you can see, this is a little bit low. It's just below the 1 inch mark. My goal is to get it somewhere in that pine board when all is said and done. This is just sitting here right now. I just kind of rested it on the top surface, but generally these have all these bolt holes, and I'll just raise it up to the point that this plate is at the proper location. So it's going to need to come up roughly 1 inch. So I just put a 3/4 inch spacer because that was convenient, on top of the transom. If you hang the outboard just with the chain, it's at the wrong angle. So this way I can rest the top of the outboard on this pine and get the bracket in where it belongs. And then I can start to assess this plate. It's still a little low. I think I'm going to get another 3/4 and stick it in there. This plate should be just at or below the bottom of the boat. So I'd rather have it a little higher than lower. So I've now raised this up 1.5 inches off the transom, and that's totally normal in these instances. These clamp brackets are not intended to have any relevance when you're bolting it to the transom. And I've used a couple clamps to hold it in tightly. Earlier, I made some reference marks here. That's the edge of this, just so that I can easily get it roughly aligned. There's the center line mark on the outboard that I made. It's 4.5 inches from the edge and the center line on the boat. I ended up with another 3/8 in there. This was a little closer to the bottom than I wanted it. And now I've got that basically right at the place that I want it, which is no higher than this, no lower than this. It's basically right at the top of that. The way this is angled in, so if you angle this out, that would actually drop just a touch. So when this is horizontal or parallel to the bottom of the boat, it'll be just a bit lower there. So I think that's where I want it, right there. Well, it seems I didn't film drilling these out. Had the camera set up, but I must not have pushed the button. On the back side here, on the outside of the transom, I've got all these holes covered with tape. So I filled them from the inside. And here they are. I had these taped around, but I pulled the tape off right next to the openings before the epoxy cured. Where is it? There it is. And then 2 underneath. 1, 2. So these are 3/4 inch holes filled with an epoxy mixture of epoxy, high density filler, and Cabosil. And before I put it in, I wet out the insides of the holes with plain epoxy. So we'll let this cure overnight, and then when we're ready to install the outboard, I'll basically drill right through the center of this. Should be the right place for the bolts. The engine is now permanently installed on the transom. It's got 4 bolts. Installation was not difficult. I basically did all the hard work the day before, got this aligned, centered where I needed it, figured out how high I wanted it. It does end up a little higher than I expected off the top of the transom. That's not a problem, but it is a little higher. But I have my anti-ventilation plate right at the bottom of the boat. It's supposed to be either from 0 to 1 inch below the bottom. This is at basically 0. They seem to be some sort of galvanized bolt with stainless nuts and washers. And I added some fiberglass backing plates on the inside here. On the aft side, the upper bolts come through from the inside out, as suggested, so that these protruding bolts don't stick out into the boat. I don't think it would have mattered much here, but that's what I did. That's what it said. The other ones I ran through from outside in. Lots of sealant behind the outboard and in all those holes, especially down here, which is at or near the waterline. It's well bedded in place, and this still needs to be rigged. There's a battery connection. There's a wire harness for the controls, fuel line, steering, and throttle cables. Steering lines and throttle cables. And if we crouch down here, you can see how that plate is directly in line with the bottom of the boat. That's where I wanted it. I had a little room for up and down there. I chose to go right at the height of the bottom. Hopefully that was the right choice. I've never done this before. If I was building this boat again, knowing what I now know, I would totally change how I built the transom. I would probably make the whole thing a thicker piece and forget about not using an extra piece of plywood. I would get another piece of plywood just to make this transom, you know, a 1.5 inches of solid plywood. I built the boat the way it was designed, and I'm okay with that. Just saying, if I was doing it again, I might make some changes. I'm very glad I put this extra stiffener, thickener piece underneath, because obviously I needed it to mount this outboard with bolts. So that's one of the reasons I got the outboard when I did, was to double check that. and I'm glad. And if I had my druthers, the transom would be a couple inches higher so that it was a little closer here. I'm really not concerned about it. This is not abnormal. It is maybe a little higher than some. That's okay. It's where it's supposed to go. And the bolts are what hold it in place. And there will be more on this outboard. It's a Tohatsu 30 remote control, and we'll be getting to all that in the pretty near future here. One petty annoyance with these bolts was that the heads are different sizes, or the nuts and the heads on the bolts are different sizes. These nuts are 3/4 US. They're a standard stainless steel nylock nut. The heads on these bolts, whatever these bolts are, they're basically a 1/2 inch diameter bolt, but those heads are 18 mil, which is roughly the same as 3/4, but it's not the same when you're putting on a bolt. So that's frustrating. And same in this direction. The same wrench would not work for the two. And call me petty or nitpicky, but I really hate that. But easily overcome, just stupid. Look at that. Exciting stuff. This is the Tohatsu side mount control that came with my engine. And because I only have 3/8 of thickness on the hull where this is going to mount on the inside of the hull, I'm going to use this teak board, which I'm going to epoxy in place, and then I can attach the control to that board. And I'm using the teak because A, I have it, and B, I can just leave it natural. I don't have to worry about trying to paint it to match or anything like that. So I'm going to cut a piece of this to the correct size and plane and sand it smooth and get ready to install that up on the boat where I want these controls. So after a couple cuts, I've trimmed this blank down to where I want it. It's a little bit wider than the piece, or a little bit longer than the piece at the forward edge. And I'm going to keep it flush at the aft edge, just so that there's more room for dealing with the key and all that. I've left just enough so that I can do a little round over. So that's where I ended up with it. And this is in the rough, but I'm just going to sand it smooth. It's a small piece, it won't take long. I'm not going to try and plane it. Just a little bit bigger than the control itself, except at the aft end where I've kept it flush. I'm going to pre-drill for these screws. There's 3 screw holes. This can't be mounted until after the control cables are attached, because they go in from the backside, or the access is from the backside. But I'm going to get this so that it's just ready to mount easily once that part is done. I don't have the cables yet because I needed to measure, so getting this located is the first order of business. This is a 12x2, which is the longest one I have. It looks like I need 12 x 2.5. Not quite long enough, so I'll get some 2.5s. Home's going to be here. Stick out about that far. So before I lay out the control, I've just laid my 6-foot level on the cockpit sole here. See if the boat is basically level, and I think that'll do for what I'm doing here. So that's where I'm going to mount the control, traced around the mounting block on that tape, and I'm going to prep that area and then epoxy this block in place. I chose a location that made sense to me, guessing at where the helm is, about here, and where that control just fell right to hand, which is right in here. So that seemed right to me. There's plenty of clearance here for the control to go to its full extent, and that's level according to the boat. So I'm going to prep that surface to accept epoxy, and then I'm going to epoxy that block in place. prepped that surface. I stayed away from the taped edges because there's no reason to try and get all of that. This will be more than sufficient to bond that block in place. My plan is to lather this up with epoxy, and I'm going to use a little hot glue to hold it in place while the epoxy cures. There's my block glued in place. I'm going to leave that tape on the surface rather than put any undue pulling pressure on that adhesive, but I've removed all the tape around the edge. It's easier to do before the epoxy hardens. And I made sure to get plenty of epoxy on the edge so that it's all sealed. There's not a gap there or anything. Here's where the backing block for the engine controls ended up. It's epoxied in place, removed all the tape. It's good and solid. It's ready for installation. You'll see I didn't necessarily sand out every one of the rough milling marks from the roughs on board that I had. This is going to be basically completely covered by the controls, so I didn't waste a lot of time getting it perfect in here. You never see it. I'm just going to leave that natural, no finish. And I've ordered control cables. I measured from here back to the transom and across to the outboard as instructed. Came up with 11.5 feet. Or rather, I came up with 10.5 feet, and it says add a foot, which is 11.5, and a 12-foot cable is the correct choice. So we're going with 12-foot cables here. Here's how the cables are hooked up. This lower one, this is the shift cable. Comes in the bottom of the control here. There's a slot, or rather a place where these grooves in the cables fit. Holds the cable ends. So this is the shift cable. Put a piece of tape on the shift cable just for ease of remembering which one it is later. And then this is the throttle cable. Comes in on top. And then this plate goes back in and locks everything in place. If you're installing these and you're wondering what the grommet is that it references, this little piece, little H-shaped piece, this just goes in here between the two control cables. I didn't know what that was. It just holds it very tightly in there and gives the upper cable a full slot into which to lock. It's not clear in the instructions what that grommet is, and I wouldn't call that a grommet, but that's what it is. So we just put that back together again. No big deal. Took about a minute and a half. But would have been nice to know ahead of time. Broke the bit off. So that arbor bit in my hole saw broke off in there. And without the support, that meant the hole saw went all over the place, so I got this. That's okay, the little flange is going to cover that. That hole, which I'm about to epoxy seal, will be for running these control cables, steering cable, and wiring harness back to the engine. And this hole here in the bulkhead is for my tachometer. I need one other opening through which to run the steering cable and any wiring up forward here. I'm going to have tachometer wiring, which I believe just runs from here, from these controls, and at least one 12-volt lead for a GPS plotter. But I think that's it. I don't know how big the steering cable is. I'm picking up the steering system tomorrow. So for that stuff, I'm probably just going to run a through haul through. And, once everything's run through, I'll plug it up with something. There's no other way to run stuff on this boat. There's no bilge. There's nothing hidden. So I've been trying to figure out the steering system that I bought for this boat. When I was looking into it, my first thought was the basic cable actuated mechanical steering. And I did a little research. There were a lot of comments in the usual places online suggesting the upgrade to hydraulic was always worth it. So I ordered a hydraulic system, and I've had it on hand for a while because I've been away, and I was starting to look into the installation, and it's immediately clear on this outboard, my Tohatsu 30, I don't know how that cylinder is going to work. And the first thing that I have to do is, this is a bracket that came with the engine. This is meant to secure to the front of that bracket there where those two bolts are. The question is, if I install this bracket on the front of the outboard, will that remotely line up with where that Baystar cylinder is? Because my first looks seem to suggest no way. So let's get that bracket installed and see if this hydraulic steering is worth the effort or not. I tried the Baystar cylinder, and I just don't see how it's going to work. There's a mounting hole way back in here. You can see the kind of welded bottom part of it right where my finger is. That's a mounting point for a bolt, but that cylinder will not fit in there at all. And on top of that, there are no instructions for this outboard in the kit. There are a lot of specific outboards mentioned, and it covers a wide variety of outboards, but for the Tohatsu 30, there's nothing. And I don't know if I'd have to come up with some sort of custom arrangement, but honestly, it's just too much. I don't care enough, and I'm frankly over it. Around online, and I haven't seen anything that helps me through this yet. So I think I'm going back to mechanical. It'll save some money, be a lot simpler, and I just am not interested in these headaches. They have a no feedback system now, so that you can actually let go of the helm and it won't turn. I had a boat that had a helm that you just could not let go of ever, or the boat would just do a hard right turn and everyone would die. For the switch to mechanical steering, I needed to measure the length for the cable. So to do this, I figured out roughly where I want my helm mounted on the bulkhead, and then I measured from side of the hull out to that, and then along the hull, the transom, and then from the transom to the center point of the engine. And that brought me up to a 13-foot system. Here's the tachometer installed and wired up. It's just 4 wires connected with this quick connect, this yellow one and the blue one, and these other terminals are not used for this model engine. This is the wiring diagram. Mine is an MFS 30. It's just the 4 wires, and you can see at the other end of the harness, it's just the 4 wires. Red, green, black, and white. Here's my little pass-through boot installed in the transom. This is actually parts of 2 of them. I either ordered or it came in a pack of 2. I only need 1. So I used, it comes with one of these plastic trim rings that goes over the rubber bellows. But because this is exposed on both sides, I used the other trim ring on the back side. And I installed these with number 6 by 1 1/4 bolts, only because I wanted to pin this second piece in place. I certainly don't need the bolts for strength. And now my control cables, wiring harness, steering cable, and any wiring can go through there and into the outboard well.